My amendment would prohibit CRT training for employees of the Department of Defense or members of the Air Force. The primary focus of our military should be mission readiness and lethality. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have continued to push for diversity, equity, and inclusion to the deficit of our servicemen and women. Divisive ideologies like CRT have no place in our military. Our service members should be learning the critical and often life-saving skills that help them and their fellow service members stay alive when they are deployed, rather than having training hours diverted to force CRT and race-based training. As a veteran, I know firsthand that our service members are not concerned about CRT training or DEI in the military. In fact, our service members care about the skills and qualifications that prepare them for war. When service members are wounded, they do not care about how diverse their medics are. They care that the medics responding to them in their time of need are qualified and trained with the skills to keep them alive. It is beyond time that we prioritize CRT and other divisive ideologies that are weakening our military and putting our nation's security at risk. We will gut CRT from our nation's military with this NDAA. We are one nation, one people, and this majority body believes in unity over division and merit over identity. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
To claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. There's actually quite a bit in this amendment that I do agree with. I think ideologies that are explicitly racist are problematic, and I certainly have seen that done. There are examples of the teaching of critical race theory and promotion of critical race theory that I personally disagree with. But there's 2 reasons to oppose this amendment. Number one, that is not happening in the United States military. We had a great debate earlier about why recruitment is down. Part of it is because of the fundamental dishonesty that the right wing is saying about the military in terms of what is going on. They are not promoting critical race theory. It is a theory that they do talk about, just like they talked about communism and fascism and a whole wide variety of other things that they don't agree with. So to suggest, as this amendment does, that our military is promoting any of this ideology is completely wrong. The second problem I have with this amendment is it does sort of push in the other direction, to want to sort of suggest, as we have seen in Florida and other states, that racism isn't really a thing. There was the famous example where what we ought to be teaching people is that, in fact, slavery had its upsides, okay? So there are problems with taking that approach. In particular, there's something in here about whether or not the Declaration of Independence is a racist document. And that's a debate I think certainly we should have, but a document that basically enshrines, well, actually it's the Declaration of Independence, I guess it's, well, the Constitution's in there too. It enshrines the fact that, if you are a black person, you cannot vote and you count for as 3/5 of a person. I think it would kind of be interesting to debate whether or not that was racist, because I think it kind of was. To ignore the history of our country, both good or bad, is a mistake. This amendment pushes us towards ignoring any of the history that is racist, that has promoted white supremacy, that has promoted slavery and Jim Crow. And to say that the people being educated in our military schools should ignore that history, I think is a great weakness. So the military does not promote CRT. They should have a robust discussion about various ideologies and also about the history of racism in this country. Ignoring it will do a disservice to the men and women who serve in the military and to the country. So I will oppose this amendment. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman of Florida is recognized.
To say that the military isn't actively doing this is, I think, misleading. In fact, I personally have seen training that our service members, to include my husband, have had to go through. To put it in perspective, my husband, before he was actually, he got out of the military, was made to write down the top 5 people he associated with, writing down their race, sexual orientation, and gender. And if those people were not diverse enough, he was then racist. Well, I have news for my colleagues across the aisle. When you have men and women deploying around the country, serving with black and brown people, since that's apparently what we are going to talk in regards to color, around the world, and you are telling them that they are racist even though they have laid down their lives for these people, I think that just shows how out of touch this governing body is. And so to say that our military is not being forced to do that is misleading. They absolutely are. And when I talk to men and women, both enlisted and at the officer level, I can tell you that they are more concerned about what's happening in the Pacific and what's happening in Russia than the fighting and the constant name calling and also the wokeification of our military. I yield the rest of my time.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. McClellan. Oh, sorry. Sorry, she was over there for a while. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've gone from Virginia to Hawaii in a few seconds. Mr. Chair, once again, it appears my colleagues fail to understand what critical race theory is. Critical race theory helps us understand the past, while DEI, as they've often been against, helps us chart the path forward to acknowledge and rectify the systemic racism that still shapes the present. But let's not conflate or confuse the two. So let me reiterate, critical race theory is simply an academic and legal framework to recognize that systemic racism is part of our nation's history. Yes, that is hard to hear, but sadly, that is absolutely the fact and the case. And that this systemic racism continues, quite frankly, to affect our society and individuals in it to this very day. These are hard truths for my colleagues that cannot bear to hear it. But there is no other way to explain the compromise enshrined for almost 80 years in our Constitution that counted slaves as 3/5 of a person to determine matters like the number of seats allotted to states for this very body, the House of Representatives. There's no other way to explain the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Asian Exclusion Act, which banned immigration of Asian people to this country for decades. Nor is there any other way to justify the grave historical injustices of Executive Order 9066 that interned over 100,000 Japanese Americans during the Second World War, including my great-grandfather, who was locked up against his will in Santa Fe, New Mexico, while my grandfather, his son, served in the military intelligence service for a country who saw and treated him and his loved ones as the enemy. Systemic racism is a part of the history of our military, the Department of Defense, and this country. There's no other way to explain the fact that even though they served bravely in the Revolutionary War, black men were formally excluded from military service after the war until the Civil War. Meanwhile, Filipino veterans of World War II waited for over 4 decades for the citizenship and benefits promised to them for their service under our flag and are still waiting till this day. If my Republican colleagues believe we can compete with our adversaries across the globe by avoiding these truths, they are sadly wrong. While our adversaries will seek to whitewash and erase histories like that of the Ukrainians, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, we must do better, we should be better, because this speaks to who we are as a union. Having our service members learn about—
I yield the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. Having our service members learn about systemic racism and think critically about the role it continues to play in our society may make some of them uncomfortable, but it is not going to make them hate America. It will, however, help them understand why inequities persist in our country, including in the ranks of our military. I hope it will remind them how far we've come and how much further we must go towards a more equitable future, one in which they, regardless of their background, can achieve their fullest potential. We need to understand critical race theory for what it is, an opportunity for us to confront our past and work towards a better future. For that reason, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time back.
Gentleman from Washington reserves. What purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to reclaim my time.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
I'd like to yield 1 minute of my time to my colleague from Florida, Representative Corey Mills.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you so much. I want to start out by saying that I really admire and I love my colleague from Hawaii. We've had many conversations together on the strengthening of our military, especially when it comes to Schofield Barracks and the rest. Same with my ranking member, my colleague, Adam Smith. I will say, however, for the record, I served in the United States military as an Army combat veteran. I proudly served with people from Hawaii, people from Puerto Rico, people from the Virgin Islands. I've seen the diversity which exists, and I think that the utilization of DEI and CRT is what has been led to the creation of the 41,000 recruitment deficit that we see today. Our military is not supposed to be prioritizing the idea ideas of critical race theory or diversity, equity, inclusion. It should be about increased lethality, readiness, and being properly equipped. This is how we defeat our enemies. It is not through the ideas of trying to create division, and it is not through the ideas of pronoun training, where I can guarantee you that we can out-pronoun all of our enemies, but the he, him, they, them, she, her is not going to make us a stronger military. So I urge my colleagues to support Ms. Paulina Luna's amendment, and I ask that we understand that we are here to strengthen our military, not to divide it. With that, I yield.
Gentlelady from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves.
I yield.
Gentlelady yields back.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentlelady's prepared. Does the gentlelady yield?
I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves.
If I could, I think we are prepared to close. I have the right to close as defending the, so I will yield her to use the remainder of her time to close her arguments, and then I will close the debate. Thank you.
Gentleman's correct. Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
I'd like to close.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
I'd like to close. I yield back.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Just as a point of clarification, so you're done. All right, great, thank you. Then I think we've concluded our remarks as well. Post the amendment for all the reasons stated. I urge opposition. I yield back the balance of my time.